No one noticed the young woman when she walked into the cafe that afternoon. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back in a simple knot, and the tiredness in her eyes was almost hidden by the way she kept looking down at the floor. She carried a small, worn-out bag that looked as if it had been with her for years, and her shoes had lost their shine long ago. At first glance, she didn't stand out in the warm, bustling cafe filled with chatter, laughter, and the smell of freshly baked bread. But soon, something happened that made her presence impossible to ignore because not a single person would let her sit. She went from table to table, politely asking, her voice soft but carrying a hint of desperation. Some customers pretended not to hear her. Others glanced up with cold eyes and shook their heads before returning to their conversations, their screens, or their coffee cups. She was invisible to them, or worse, a nuisance in a space where they had come to relax. Each rejection pushed her shoulders lower, and each unkind glance made her shrink further into herself. She didn't order anything, didn't argue, didn't cause trouble. She just wanted a place to sit, a corner where she could rest for a while. It was then that a little boy noticed her. He was sitting at a table near the window with his father, a tall man in his late 30s, with tired eyes that somehow still carried warmth. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, why isn't anyone letting her sit?" The father turned his head and followed his son's gaze. He saw the young woman standing awkwardly by the counter, trying not to cry, trying not to look as though the rejection had already broken her spirit. The father didn't hesitate. He called out gently, "Miss, would you like to sit here?" His voice carried kindness, not pity, not judgment, just genuine kindness. She froze, her eyes wide in surprise, as though she couldn't quite believe she had heard correctly. After a moment, she nodded, clutching her bag to her chest, and walked toward their table. The little boy smiled brightly as she sat down, and for the first time that day, she felt the warmth of being welcomed. She thanked him in a quiet voice. "You didn't have to," she began, but he shook his head with a small smile. "Sometimes the smallest kindness is exactly what someone needs. You don't owe me an explanation. Just breathe. Rest." For a while, the three of them sat in silence. The father helped his son with a muffin, and the young woman simply sat there, breathing in the smell of fresh coffee and letting her heart slow down. But the father could tell she was carrying something heavy. He didn't push her, didn't ask too many questions, but when she finally spoke, her words poured out like a river that had been waiting too long to break free. She told him she had lost her job 2 months ago. Rent was overdue, and she had been staying with different acquaintances, trying not to overstay her welcome anywhere. That morning, she had been turned away from a shelter because it was already full. She had come into the cafe not for food, she didn't have the money, but just to sit for a moment, to gather her strength and decide where to go next. She admitted that the rejections had hurt more than she expected. "It's not just about a chair," she said softly. "It's about feeling like I don't belong anywhere." The father listened quietly, his son resting his head against his arm. When she finished, he sighed deeply, and for a moment, it looked as though he understood her pain more than he let on. Then, in a voice almost as soft as hers, he said, "I know that feeling. After my wife passed, I felt like every table in the world had a seat for someone else, but not for me. People were kind on the surface, but when it came to sharing their lives, sharing their space, I was always left standing." His words caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the grief he carried, even though he was trying to be strong for his son. In that moment, Two people who thought they were invisible found themselves seen. The little boy, with the innocence only a child could have, reached across the table and offered her half of his muffin. "You can have some," he said brightly. "Mommy used to say sharing makes things taste better." Her eyes filled with tears at the gesture, but she smiled, a real smile this time, and accepted the piece of muffin as though it were the most precious gift she had ever been given. That small act changed the atmosphere around the table. She laughed when the boy made a silly joke, and the father noticed how her shoulders slowly relaxed, how the sadness in her eyes dimmed just a little. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt like she belonged at least to this moment, at least to this table. The father didn't have much himself. Being a single dad was not easy. Money was tight, and loneliness was a constant companion. But he had learned something through his struggles: kindness was not about abundance. It was about presence, about seeing someone when the world refused to look. So when he offered to help her find a shelter, when he scribbled down the address of a local organization that helped women in crisis, it wasn't charity, it was humanity. "You're not alone," he told her firmly. "You deserve to sit at the table, just like anyone else." She held onto that piece of paper as though it were a lifeline. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked at his son and then back at her. "Because one day, I want my boy to grow up and know that kindness isn't optional. It's who we are. It's how we survive. And because I know what it feels like to be left standing when all you needed was a place to sit." When she left the cafe that day, her steps were lighter. She still had challenges ahead of her, but she no longer felt invisible. Someone had seen her. Someone had shared a table, a muffin, and most importantly, hope. And as she walked out, the little boy waved and shouted, "Bye. Don't forget you always have a place at our table." She laughed through her tears, the sound carrying across the cafe, silencing for a brief moment all the people who had turned her away earlier. This story isn't just about a chair in a cafe. It's about how easy it is to pass by someone, to dismiss them, to believe their struggle is not our problem. But it's also about how powerful one act of kindness can be enough to turn despair into hope, rejection into belonging, and strangers into unexpected friends. So if you're listening to this story right now, let it remind you, kindness doesn't cost much, but it can mean everything. Sometimes, it's as simple as making room at your table. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Kindness Stories, where we believe every act of grace, no matter how small, can change the world.